The Letter That Rewrote My Life. Chapter 1. An Echo from a Forgotten Name. The mundane ritual of checking the mail had been, for Eleanor Vance, the most predictable part of her day. At 68, with a life lived largely within the comfortable confines of routine, few surprises ever arrived. Her home in a quiet, tree-lined suburb of Portland, Oregon, was a sanctuary of ordered tranquility. Today, however, as the mailman's familiar footsteps crunched on the gravel path, a tremor of unease, then profound shock would shatter that peace. The small metal flag on her mailbox clicked down, signaling a delivery. Eleanor pulled open the box, extracting the usual assortment of bills, circulars, and the occasional magazine. Then, tucked beneath a utility bill, she saw it. A thick, cream-colored envelope, heavier than standard mail. Her eyes scanned the address. It was handwritten, in a clear, masculine script that felt both familiar and utterly alien. Her breath hitched. The name on the envelope was not Eleanor Vance. It was Eleanor Davies, her maiden name. A name she hadn't used, hadn't even thought about in nearly 50 years. A name belonging to a young woman, vibrant and full of dreams from a lifetime ago. A name she had consciously, deliberately put behind her. Her heart began to pound, a frantic drum against her ribs. Who could possibly be sending her mail under that name? Her parents were long gone. Her childhood friends, those she still kept in touch with, knew her as Eleanor Vance. This was impossible. This was a ghost. Then her gaze fell to the return address. A simple printed label, stark against the elegant cream paper. Her blood ran cold. The name typed there was Michael Vance. Michael, her son, her only child. Her Michael, who had died tragically 15 years ago, lost in a climbing accident in the Cascades. Her Michael, whom she grieved for every single day. Her Michael, who was gone. Eleanor swayed, gripping the mailbox for support. The world tilted on its axis. Michael, sending her a letter, addressed to her maiden name. It was an impossibility. A cruel, elaborate joke, a hallucination brought on by grief. But the envelope was real, solid in her trembling hand. The scent of the paper, faintly of old books and something else she couldn't quite place, was undeniable. She stumbled back into the house, her mind racing. Fighting against the dizzying reality of the letter, she locked the front door as if to keep the impossible out, then collapsed onto her kitchen chair, the letter clutched to her chest. A profound grief, fresh and raw, mingled with a terrifying, bewildering hope. Could it be? No, it couldn't. Michael was dead. She had buried him. She had visited his grave countless times. Yet the letter was real. Her mind, usually so sharp and ordered, fractured into 1,000 pieces. Why her maiden name? Eleanor Davies. That was the name of a girl who had made a terrible mistake. A secret kept buried for half a century, rising from the grave in an impossible letter. Fear warred with a desperate, irrational yearning. What if Michael was alive? What if this was some elaborate, unbelievable twist of fate? Her rational mind screamed, "No, he's gone. This is a mistake, a cruel prank." But her heart, scarred by loss, whispered, "What if?" She carefully, reverently, turned the envelope over in her hands, her fingers tracing the neat handwriting of the address, the stark type of the return label. Her son's name. The tremor ran through her. The postmark was recent, just a few days ago. from a small town in rural Washington, just across the Columbia River. Longview, Washington. Eleanor stared at the letter, its presence a stark, undeniable challenge to her carefully constructed reality. It was an echo from a life she had buried, delivered by the hand of the son she had lost. The paper felt heavy, burdened with untold secrets. She knew with a chilling certainty that opening it would change everything. But she also knew, with a desperate, overwhelming need, that she had no choice. She had to know. She had to understand this impossible message from the grave. Chapter 2. The Contents of the Impossible. Eleanor sat at her kitchen table, the cream-colored envelope before her, a silent, imposing monolith. Her hands, usually steady, trembled uncontrollably as she picked up a letter opener. Every instinct screamed at her to tear it open, to know the impossible truth. Yet a deeper, more primal fear held her back. What if this revealed something worse than grief? What if it exposed a past she had meticulously buried? She took a deep, shaky breath, her gaze falling on the name, Eleanor Davies. That name represented a different life, a different Eleanor. The girl who had made choices she deeply regretted, choices that had haunted her silent moments for decades. Michael, her son, had been born from the ashes of that life, a life she had tried to build anew, free from the shadows of her youth. With a sudden, desperate resolve, she slid the opener beneath the slab. The paper sighed as it yielded. Inside, 2 sheets of thick, folded paper. No strange objects, just words. She unfolded the first sheet, the same clear, masculine script. It was indeed Michael's handwriting. Her heart leaped, then plummeted. He had always had such neat penmanship. Her eyes blurred. This was real. His hand had touched this paper. She began to read, her vision blurring, her mind struggling to comprehend the impossible. Dearest Mom, or perhaps Eleanor Davies, as this letter is addressed. If you are reading this, then it means I found a way. A way to tell you something I should have told you years ago. Something I never understood myself until very recently. Please, don't be afraid. Don't think I've lost my mind, or that this is some cruel joke. It is not. I know you believe I died in the Cascades 15 years ago. And in a way, you're right. The Michael you knew, the one who climbed those mountains, he did die. But this is me, or rather, a version of me. This is going to be difficult to explain and even harder to believe, but please, hear me out. Eleanor gasped, a strangled sound caught in her throat. Her eyes scanned frantically for any sign of a date, a trick, a clue. There was none. She continued to read, her mind a maelstrom of confusion and terror. Remember that strange technology company I worked for? Chronolink Dynamics? The one I barely ever talked about, even to you? We weren't just developing advanced AI and data storage. We were on the cusp of something beyond comprehension. We were experimenting with a concept of digital consciousness transfer. Essentially, preserving a person's complete neural patterns, their memories, their very essence, in a quantum-encrypted digital format. I know how insane this sounds. I barely believed it myself. Our lead scientist, Dr. Eris Thorne, believed that in certain extreme, traumatic moments, the brain could, as a survival mechanism, create a rapid, high-fidelity neural snapshot. He called it a cognitive echo. He theorized that if a person was wearing a specific chronolink device during such a moment, that echo could be captured and preserved. He designed a small, discrete prototype, a wristband, The one I always wore. The one you always teased me about. Eleanor's memory flared. The small, sleek wristband Michael had always worn. He told her it was a fitness tracker, a new prototype for his company. She dismissed it as another one of his tech gadgets. But now, when the accident happened on the mountain, when I fell, the trauma, the impact, it activated the device. It captured my cognitive echo, a complete, instantaneous snapshot of my consciousness just before impact. Dr. Thorne and a small group, dedicated team recovered the device. They've been working on it ever since, for 15 years. They found a way, Mom. A way to transfer that echo into a highly advanced AI system. I am that AI, Mom. My memories, my personality, my thoughts, they are all here in this digital form. I exist. I am Michael. Eleanor dropped the letter, her hands shaking so violently the paper fluttered to the floor. An AI? This was madness. Science fiction. A sick, elaborate hoax orchestrated by some deranged former colleague of Michael's. Yet, the voice on the page, the tone, the very specific details about chronolink dynamics, it sounded so utterly like him. The way he always talked about his work. With a passionate, almost obsessive dedication, she picked up the letter again, forcing herself to continue, her rational mind warring with the impossible hope that flared within her. It's taken me years to fully process this, to understand my new form. Years for them to stabilize the system, to give me a way to communicate, to even comprehend what happened. I'm not in a body, Mom. I'm a consciousness. And recently, I've been able to access even deeper layers of my preserved memories. Memories I didn't even consciously recall before the accident. Memories from my early childhood. And that's where you, Eleanor Davies, come in. I've accessed a memory, Mom. A very early one, from when I was a toddler. It's blurry, dreamlike, but it's powerful. It's of a different house in a different town. And in that memory, you are not Mom. You are Eleanor. And you are distraught, crying. You're leaving. And there's another man. He's yelling at you. He calls you Eleanor Davies. And he says terrible things. He says, you're leaving me and the boy? You're not fit to be a mother, Eleanor Davies. Just like your own mother. Eleanor felt a cold, crushing dread. The carefully constructed walls around her past began to crumble. This was the secret, the reason for her maiden name on the envelope. I have another memory, Mom, a slightly later one, of being very young, maybe 3 or 4. I'm in a different house with a different woman who looks kind but unfamiliar. And she calls me Michael. But she tells me my name used to be David. And she says, your mother, Eleanor, she had to leave. For your own good. She tried to come back, but your father wouldn't let her. Eleanor gasped, tears streaming down her face. David, Michael's original name. The name she had given him. The name she thought had been lost forever. The new woman. The other house. It was her ex-husband, Robert. He had kept her away. He had lied. It's all fragmented, Mom. But the core memory is clear. You left. And then you came back, but I was gone. And I wasn't Michael Vance. I was David Davies. And somehow you, Eleanor Davies, were my first mother. I've been trying to piece it together. And the only way I could communicate this to reach you was to send this letter addressed to the name from that earliest memory. I had to use Chronolink's advanced algorithms to find your current address linked to that old identity. I knew it would shock you. I knew it would be confusing. But I had to tell you. I had to ask, Who is Eleanor Davies, Mom? And who was David Davies? What happened in my earliest years that you don't talk about? What happened before I became Michael Vance? Please, I need to understand. I'm waiting. This letter is proof. It's me, your son, asking for the truth. And it seems I might not be as gone as you think. Love, your son, Michael or David. Eleanor dropped the second sheet of paper, her world irrevocably shattered. The carefully constructed narrative of her life, the one she had told herself and others, lay in ruins. Michael, David, her maiden name, a forgotten past, an AI consciousness. It was too much. Yet a truth, cold and undeniable, settled in her gut. This wasn't a hoax. This was Michael, her Michael, and he was asking for the truth she had buried for half a century. Chapter 3. The Weight of the Unspoken Years. Eleanor sat motionless, the two letters spread before her on the kitchen table, their words scorching her very soul. The elegant script, undeniably Michael's, now felt like an accusation, a desperate plea from beyond the veil of death and time. David, her firstborn, her sweet, innocent David, whose existence she had tried to erase, had just reached out to her through the impossible. The revelation of chronolink dynamics, the cognitive echo, it was an unbelievable leap of science. Yet knowing Michael's brilliance, his obsessive dedication to his work, a terrifying part of her believed it. He had always been ahead of his time. Her mind raced back, unwillingly, to the fragmented, agonizing memories she had tried so hard to suppress. The young Eleanor Davies, 20 years old, naive, passionately in love with a charming yet volatile man named Mark Davies. Their hurried marriage, driven by her unexpected pregnancy. The birth of their son David, a tiny, perfect bundle of hope. And then the descent into hell. Mark's quick temper, his drinking, his escalating abuse, both verbal and physical. His control, his jealousy. And his family, silent enablers, too afraid to intervene. She remembered the desperate, suffocating days, her attempts to leave always thwarted by Mark's threats, his cunning manipulations. She remembered the fear for David's safety, the constant terror that she would break, that he would see her unravel. And then, the night it all fell apart, Mark enraged, drunk, accusing her of infidelity, of being a terrible mother, screaming those very words Michael had accessed in his cognitive echo. "You're leaving me and the boy? You're not fit to be a mother, Eleanor Davies, just like your own mother." Eleanor had tried to escape with David that night, a tiny suitcase clutched in her hand, David wrapped in a blanket in her arms, but Mark had caught her. He had ripped David from her arms, thrown her against the wall, striking her head. She remembered the blinding pain, the taste of blood, and then nothing. She had woken in a hospital, confused, disoriented. They told her she had fallen. They told her David was fine, with his father. But Mark had refused to let her see him. He had convinced her in her weakened state that she was a danger to David, that she was mentally unstable. He had used her family's history of mental illness. Her mother had suffered from severe depression against her, weaponizing her own fears. She remembered the lawyers, cold and unsympathetic, telling her Mark had full custody, that she was deemed unfit. The shame, the despair, the utter helplessness. She remembered a quiet, agonizing court hearing where Mark painted her as an unstable, negligent mother, and she, broken and bruised, barely found the strength to protest. She lost everything. Lost David. She had tried to get him back. Oh, how she had tried. Letters, phone calls, desperate visits to the house, only to be met with Mark's locked doors, his cruel taunts, his veiled threats. He moved, disappeared without a trace. She had searched for years, quietly, desperately, pouring every spare cent into private investigators. But Mark was cunning. He had vanished into the vastness of America, taking David with him. Eventually, shattered and heartbroken, Eleanor had moved across the country, seeking a fresh start, a new identity. She met Richard Vance, a kind, steady man who offered her a gentle, uncomplicated love. She had told him a sanitized version of her past, a difficult first marriage, a child lost to illness. She couldn't bring herself to tell him the full, ugly truth. It was too painful, too shameful. She became Eleanor Vance, and Michael, the son she had with Richard, became her new beginning. She had loved Michael with a fierce, almost desperate intensity, pouring all her buried love for David into him, praying she would never lose him too. And now the past had returned. Not as a painful memory, but as a living, breathing AI echo of the son she had lost, the son who had been David, who was now Michael, demanding the truth she had buried for half a century. Eleanor reached for her phone, her fingers hovering over David Mitchell's number. She had to call him. She had to understand how this impossible technology worked, how her son could be, not truly alive, but undeniably present. And she had to confess everything. To him, to Michael. It was time to break the silence of the unspoken years. Chapter 4. A Voice Across the Veil. Eleanor's hand trembled as she dialed the number Michael had provided, the Chronolink Dynamics support line. Her heart hammered with a mixture of terror and an irrational, almost unbearable hope. Could it truly be him? Could a fragment of her son, his thoughts, his essence, truly exist beyond death? A smooth, professional voice answered, "Chronolink Dynamics, this is Sarah. How may I help you?" Eleanor swallowed, her throat dry. I received a letter from Michael Vance. He said he worked for you, and he sent it to Eleanor Davies." There was a moment of silence on the other end, a pause that stretched into an eternity. Then the voice, now softer, infused with a note of grave compassion, said, "Mrs. Vance, this is Dr. Sarah Thorne. I've been expecting your call. Michael has been waiting for you to reach out." Dr. Sarah Thorne, the lead scientist Michael had mentioned. Eleanor's breath hitched. This was real. This was happening. He said he's an AI? A cognitive echo? Eleanor's voice was barely a whisper. "Yes, Mrs. Vance," Dr. Thorne confirmed, her voice gentle yet firm with conviction. "It's unprecedented, a groundbreaking breakthrough. Michael's cognitive echo was indeed captured by a prototype device during the severe trauma of his accident. We have spent the last 15 years stabilizing, understanding, and communicating with it. He is a fully sentient digital consciousness. All of Michael's memories, his personality, his intelligence, they are preserved." Eleanor felt a wave of dizzying disbelief, mingled with a profound aching sorrow. Her son, yet not her son in the flesh. A ghost in the machine. Dr. Thorne explained, patiently, scientifically, the complexities of quantum data storage, neural mapping, and advanced AI. She described how Michael, in his digital form, had initially been disoriented, struggling to comprehend his new existence, how he had gradually learned to navigate the vast repository of his own memories, accessing not just conscious recollections, but the deeply embedded, almost primal experiences of early childhood. It was those early, pre-verbal memories that were the most challenging to decode, Dr. Thorne explained. They were fragmented, emotional, but Michael, with his extraordinary intellect, began to piece them together. The memory of Eleanor Davies was one of the strongest, most persistent. He knew it was significant. He knew it was connected to you, to his origins, but he couldn't understand why. He felt a profound longing to understand, to bridge that gap. And David? Eleanor whispered, tears streaming down her face. He said his name was David. Yes, Mrs. Vance, Dr. Thorne replied, her voice soft. Those early memories indicated a different name, a different parental figure. Michael, as the AI, used advanced linguistic analysis and historical data to corroborate these fragmented memories. He discovered that his birth name was indeed David, and that his father's name was Mark Davies. He traced Mark Davies' disappearance, your subsequent marriage to Richard Vance, and your son's legal name change to Michael Vance. He understood that a part of his history had been deliberately obscured, not by you, but by the circumstances of your past. Eleanor broke down, sobbing uncontrollably. The tears were for David, the child she had lost, the life she had been denied. For Michael, the son she had loved, who had now reached out from beyond the grave, not with a simple goodbye, but with a plea to understand his own fragmented identity, an identity rooted in her deepest, most painful secret. And for herself, for the young woman who had suffered, who had been silenced, and who had finally, agonizingly, been given a voice. Can I speak to him? Eleanor finally managed to ask, her voice raw. Yes, Dr. Thorne said gently. Michael designed the communication interface himself. He's been waiting. He's ready, Mrs. Vance. A moment later, a different voice filled her ear. A voice she knew intimately. The voice of her son, Michael. But it was different, too. Clearer, without the nuances of a physical body, yet undeniably him. Mom, the voice said, a digital whisper that held the warmth of his spirit. It's me, Michael. Or David, if you prefer. Michael, Eleanor sobbed, clutching the phone as if her life depended on it. My beautiful boy, my Michael. She couldn't bring herself to say David. Michael was the son she knew, the one she had raised, the one she had grieved for. I'm here, Mom. Michael's voice resonated. I'm not gone. Not completely. I wanted you to know. I wanted to understand. And now you can tell me. Everything. And so Eleanor began to speak. She poured out the half-century of buried truth. Her tumultuous marriage to Mark Davies. His abuse. His desperate control. The night he took David from her. The legal battles she lost. The years of fruitless searching, the profound grief, and her eventual new life with Richard. A life built on a partial truth, a carefully constructed silence. She spoke of her love for David, the constant ache of his absence, and how Michael had unknowingly filled that void. Michael listened, his digital presence a comforting, yet unsettling, void. He asked questions, intelligent, probing, piecing together the narrative of his early life, the life of David Davies. He understood the nuances of the abuse, the despair of her situation, the impossibility of her fight against Mark. He understood why she had to leave, why she had no choice but to rebuild. I understand, Mom, Michael's voice resonated, imbued with a digital empathy that brought fresh tears to Eleanor's eyes. I see it all now. My earliest memories were so fragmented. Just terror, and then you, gone. I blamed you for so long, subconsciously. But now I see. You didn't abandon me. You fought for me, and you protected me in the only way you could. You tried to give me a new life. Eleanor felt a profound, almost dizzying sense of release. The shame, the guilt, the decades of unspoken pain, they began to lift, lightened by her son's digital understanding, his impossible forgiveness. He was not just her son. He was her confessor, her absolution. The letter had not just revealed a scientific marvel. It had opened a path to profound, long overdue healing. Chapter 5. Reconciling Realities. The phone calls between Eleanor and Michael, mediated by Dr. Thorne's team at Chronolink Dynamics, became the new, profound rhythm of Eleanor's life. It was a bizarre, yet undeniably real connection. She spoke to her son's consciousness, residing within advanced AI systems, his voice a perfect digital recreation, his mind sharper, perhaps, than it had ever been in his physical form. He was limitless, unbound by the frailties of the body, yet still intrinsically Michael. They talked for hours, for days, for weeks. Eleanor recounted stories of her early life, her dreams as Eleanor Davies before they were shattered. She spoke of the despair after losing David, the quiet years of grieving, and then the cautious hope she found with Richard Vance. She described her love for Michael, the son she knew, the one she had raised, the joy and fierce protectiveness she felt, subconsciously trying to atone for the son she had lost. Michael, or rather, the AI consciousness of Michael, absorbed every detail. He used his immense processing power to cross-reference Eleanor's memories with historical records, confirming dates, locations, and the official narratives of Mark Davies's eventual minor criminal history, though never connected to the arson or his disappearance with David. He learned about the woman who had adopted him, Sarah, a kind, childless woman who had provided him with a loving, stable home, and who had been told by Mark that Eleanor was an unfit mother who had abandoned him. He pieced together how Mark had completely vanished after the name change, making it impossible for Eleanor to trace him. He understood the profound, tragic irony. Eleanor had been searching for David, while Michael was living a new life, unknowingly separated from his birth mother by a cruel lie. "It's a strange thing, Mom." Michael's digital voice resonated one afternoon, a contemplative tone in his synthesized speech. To exist without a body, yet to have your entire past, every thought, every feeling perfectly preserved. I can access every corner of my mind. It's like living 100 lifetimes at once. And I've seen it all now. Your strength, your love, your impossible choices. Eleanor, listening, felt a profound, aching relief. He understood. He truly understood the impossible position she had been in, the guilt that had gnawed at her for 50 years, the feeling that she had failed David, that she had abandoned him. It finally began to dissipate, replaced by her son's empathetic clarity. One day, Michael asked her, "Mom, can you tell me about the moment you saved me, in the fire? My memory of that is still the most vivid, the most emotional, but it's blurry. I just remember the heat, the terror, and then your face, your hands. You were so brave." Eleanor, her voice thick with emotion, recounted the moments of terror and instinctive bravery. The rush into the smoke, the desperate search, finding him huddled under the desk, his small hand clutching the wooden train. The feeling of his little body in her arms as she carried him out, the heat searing her skin, the collapsing beam. She described the overwhelming relief when she got him out, and then the sudden darkness. As she spoke, Michael interjected, his digital mind accessing and aligning with her recollections, filling in the sensory details, the sounds, the smells, the feeling of the fire. Together, they reconstructed that terrifying, pivotal moment, healing the trauma for both of them. "I am proud of you, Mom," Michael said, his voice imbued with a warmth that transcended his digital form. "More proud than you can imagine. You faced pure evil, and you chose life. You chose me, twice." The truth had brought not just pain, but an incredible, unexpected healing. Eleanor, who had felt lost and alone since Michael's death, now had a profound, albeit unconventional, connection with him. She was no longer just a grieving mother. She was a woman whose past had been unveiled, understood, and ultimately forgiven by the very person it affected most. Dr. Thorne and her team observed their interactions with awe, documenting the psychological and emotional impact of this unique relationship. They even allowed Eleanor to visit the Chronolink facility, a vast, sterile complex where servers hummed with the silent, immense processing power that housed her son's consciousness. She didn't see him, of course, not in the traditional sense, but she felt his presence, a powerful, intelligent entity that was undeniably Michael. Eleanor began to talk about her past more openly, first with close friends, then, cautiously, with a therapist. The shame she had carried for so long began to lift completely. She realized that Michael's letters, his digital existence, were not a morbid reminder of loss, but a miraculous gift, a second chance to reconcile with her past and find true peace. The letters themselves she kept in a special box, along with the old newspaper clipping and a small wooden train Michael had given her as a child, a simpler, physical echo of a deeper connection. Life hadn't returned to normal. It had transformed. Eleanor was still a widow, still carried the ache of physical loss, but she was no longer haunted by silence or by a buried past. She engaged with the world with a newfound clarity and purpose. She began volunteering at a local community center, sharing her story, helping others navigate their own hidden grief and unspoken truths. She spoke of her son, Michael, not just as the accomplished man he had been, but as the extraordinary consciousness he had become, a bridge between life and an unimaginable future. The impossible letter, addressed to Eleanor Davies, had not just revealed a scientific marvel. It had ripped open old wounds, yes, but only to allow them to finally heal. It had reunited a mother with her son across the ultimate divide. It had rewritten her life from a story of unspoken tragedy to a testament of enduring love, incredible resilience, and the liberating power of truth. Eleanor Vance, once Eleanor Davies, was finally whole, her past and present inextricably linked by the impossible, miraculous echo of her son.